Many people struggle with imposter syndrome, but I never have. And after this video, I hope you never will again. My name's Solomon Khan. I'm the CEO of a data startup called Delivery Layer. And before that, I was a leader in the field of data and data science for a long time. And data science has a huge problem with imposter syndrome where it runs rampant in the industry. Many people feel it and struggle with it. And in the course of leading large teams, I've worked to help many people try to overcome it. And so probably everybody knows, but for those that don't, imposter syndrome is where you feel like an imposter at your job, despite working in that field or being seen as successful by many other people in that field. For whatever reason, you just don't think that you belong. So again, it's widespread in the data world, and I'm making this video because in my experience, the typical advice that people give or that you can read online for how to get rid of imposter syndrome is completely wrong and actually makes imposter syndrome worse. So I'll share why, and over the course of this video, I've sort of distilled my advice into 4 mindset shifts that can help you better see what's happening, and then 1 activity that, when you combine those, should hopefully help you banish your imposter syndrome forever. And so here's what most articles you read and friends that you talk to will try to do. They'll try to talk about how great you are and how you do really belong in the industry and how you're crazy to think that you don't belong in the industry when it's so obvious to everyone that you are so great. And doing that is just going to make things worse. And here's why. You know yourself better than anyone else. So you're not going to trust vague advice that is from the internet or from online articles that are more credible than your own feelings. And even when your friends try to tell you that you're great, you're just not going to trust them either, because you know for a fact that they're just trying to make you feel good. Friends that don't actually see your work and aren't experts in your field aren't qualified to be able to tell you even whether the actual level of your skills are where they should be, right? Like, I have a really close friend who's a radiologist, and he could tell me for a week straight about how great of a data leader I am, but how could he know? He couldn't. It's well-meaning, it's nice, but what happens is that when you read those online articles and you still feel that way, or your friends tell you that you're really great and then you still feel that way, it ends up just making you feel even worse about yourself, and you get more discouraged. And so here's my mindset number 1 for how to really solve imposter syndrome, which is, don't try to bring yourself up, try to tear other people down. And this works because imposter syndrome is about the gap between how you see yourself versus where everyone else is in the field. And you think that all the real people are all the way up here and you're just all the way down here. And there's this massive gap. And as long as you close that gap, you're not going to feel like an imposter anymore. And tearing people down closes that gap in a much more effective way than trying to artificially build yourself up. And so that's why it works, because tearing down other people doesn't require you to change anything about what you feel about yourself. You can still be the flawed human being that you know you are. You're just going to have company of everyone else who's also a flawed human being, no different than you. And so here's a couple of ways to think about tearing people down. So let's start all the way at the tippity top with the most important and powerful job in the world, the President of the United States. Now, I want you to take a look at the current and past presidents, right? Trump and Biden, because I'm making this video in 2023. Regardless of your political affiliations, the vast majority of you will strongly believe that at least one of those people is a complete and utter buffoon. And so Just remember, a complete buffoon can get elected to be the president of the United States, the most powerful job in the world. And you're worried about making it as a data person or a software engineer and not being like a real data person, right? But it's not just the president of the United States. This happens in every job, in every single industry. I mean, look at some of the most legendary investors, right? Sequoia Capital, the world's most prestigious venture capital firm, gave a lot of money to FTX, which disappeared when they went bankrupt, right? They're still amazing investors. They make mistakes. They're not perfect. Nobody is, right? SoftBank, again, another legendary investment company, lost something like $17 billion in WeWork, right? That they're still legendary, but they lost a ton of money, right? And after that amount of loss that they drove, they're still top tier. And you're worried that whatever mistakes that you're making at the low end of your junior data position don't make you a real data person. Give me a break. You're okay. You're allowed to not be perfect, right? Even the top people in the world are not perfect. They make massive mistakes. They make mistakes with a lot more zeros behind them than you do. And that's okay. That's the way the world works. All of those people that you think are these like titans of industry are just regular people, let alone the normal people in your industry who are also just normal, right? So now getting specifically to like data, right? So you're not actually tearing down real people, by the way. When you tear down people, you're just tearing down this idealized version in your head of them that doesn't exist. It's just factually incorrect, because in a world with like social media where people only talk about their successes, of course it seems like everyone else is always doing these amazingly cool data things and doing things that you wouldn't even know where to start with. But when people post on LinkedIn or give conference talks, it's no different than like putting a filter and photoshopping on Instagram. It's highly edited and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So I'll give a personal story. I remember being at this one conference where a data leader gave a talk about this amazing machine learning model that his team had built there, where they were predicting hard drive failures for a major manufacturer. And so these data centers would buy thousands and thousands of hard drives, and they'd be able to predict what was the likelihood that a hard drive was going to fail. And it was really cool. And I was like, wow, that's such a cool project. And then during the Q&A, someone in the audience asked, what impact it had on customers. And the guy doing the presentation said that customers didn't care, and they actually didn't even use it because it didn't matter for them that it was like a 25% chance that this hard drive would fail in 6 months in this huge data center. They just waited for the hard drive to fail, and then they replaced it because they had backups, and it didn't really do them much to know that out of 100, 25 of them were going to fail. They didn't know which ones, and they just waited around until they failed, and then they replaced them, right? And I was sitting there shocked that this guy got up and was essentially bragging for an hour about wasting everybody's time and millions of dollars for something that nobody did anything with and customers didn't care about. And if nobody had asked that question, I would have had no idea. I would have just been in the audience thinking, oh, wow, these other companies are doing this really cool stuff that I is more advanced than I kind of even know how to do. And look at how amazing it is. That's actually not the case. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes when you hear about the stuff that's going on. And, here's what I've seen after many years of leading data teams, both on the people side and on the project side. Everybody has things that they need to work on, myself and every top performer included. Work is hard for everybody. Data work is hard. It's hard work for a lot of different reasons that are outside of the scope of this video, but I write about it a lot on LinkedIn if you want to follow along. But data work is hard. don't think that other people are able to do these really hard things seamlessly, because they're not. It's just as hard for them, or they've gone through many iterations to where they're more skilled. You're not seeing all the challenges and the failures behind the scenes, which gets us to the next point. Mindset shift number 1, tearing people down. Number 2 is that you're not an imposter. You might just be bad. And so this is where I'm going to take the opposite advice of what a lot of people online will tell you, which is they're going to just say automatically, "Oh, you're amazing. You're great at your job. You're awesome in every way. How could you feel like an imposter?" You might not be. You might not be good at your job or certain elements of your job. But being bad at your job is in a totally different universe than being an imposter. Mathematically, half of all people are below average at their job, and no one can stop that math. And that math continues all the way at the upper echelons, right? Half of all CEOs are below average CEOs. Half of all chief data officers are below average chief data officers. That's just math, right? Even though they might individually be very competent, hardworking, great people, that's just the way that it is. And it's also expected that someone new to a job is going to start off below average, and then over time, as they learn skills, oftentimes the hard way, they're not going to be at that level of people who have been doing it for much longer, and that's normal. So you might not be good at certain parts of your job. Welcome to the club of everyone, even top performers. And so it's not that you don't belong. You might just be bad. Here's the difference, though. If you're bad at something, there should be something specific that comes with that general feeling of badness that you can address. So, for example, if you're bad at dealing with business stakeholders as a data person, or if you don't understand pivot tables in Excel, those are things you can practice and get better on and read books and take courses and develop those skills. And then over time, you'll get better at those skills, and you'll go from bad to okay to good to great sometimes. That's happened to me with a lot of different skills. And so you can't get better, though, at a vague anxiety of I'm just not a real data person, or I'm not really supposed to be here, because that's not a specific thing you can get better on. And so to get rid of that imposter syndrome, part of it is you have to take that vague anxiety of, oh, wow, I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be in this room, right? And you need to change it to a much more specific list of things about your job that you feel, and even if you seem, other people are telling you you're good and you feel like you're not good, that's fine. If you feel you're not good at specific things, write down those specific things, and those can be things that you work on. And then over time, as you work on those things, then you're going to get better. And those things might be really holding you back from being a top performer. And then once you work on them, then you will be a top performer. Okay. And again, even if it's a long list, that's not a problem. It can be very, very long, and there could be important things on there. That's fine. It is what it is. Everybody starts from zero. I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and sometimes they expect that the first time they try things, they're going to be really good. And oftentimes that's not the case, and they get pretty frustrated. And every single time we have this conversation around how it's totally normal that when you compare your abilities of shooting a basketball to the NBA players that you see on TV, or compare your abilities to the teenagers that you see who've been doing something for 10 or 15 years that you have only spent 5 minutes on, of course, you're not going to be even close to as good. And that's fine. And over time, if you put the work in, then you can get better. That's normal. Okay. So, and here's one other thing. If there isn't anything specific that you can point to say, I'm an imposter because I'm bad at X and Y and Z and all these other people are good at it, and you actually don't have the specifics, the specifics of things that have actually held you back from something real. So not a vague anxiety, but where like you've tried to do something or you made a mistake at work because of your deficiency in some skill. If you don't have any of those things, I would argue, number one, that should be proof that you're not an imposter, right? If you don't even have some very specific things that you need to improve, then hopefully you can make yourself feel like you're good. And then secondly, I would argue that you should challenge yourself more, because if you're not at a job that pushes you to be better, then you're not making the full use of your capabilities. Especially if you're at a data job, there should always be things that are hard. If not, then you could probably challenge yourself to go up a level and try to drive more impact and make more of a difference. Because at the higher levels, there is no perfection. Okay. And remember, the best baseball players in the world still only get on base 30% of the time, right? They're out 70% of the time, and that's world-class performance. So data work is not easy. And as a leader for a long time, I can say that it's never perfect. There's always problems. So if you look at problems as evidence that there's something wrong with you, as opposed to something that naturally comes along with data work, then again, you're just going to have a mismatch of expectations versus reality. And so I'm here to say that, and to normalize the fact that there are always things wrong. And, you have to try to optimize them to have the things that are wrong not impact the important things going on in the business, but that's the reality of data work. Okay. Now here's mindset shift number 3. You will work in a subset of your field, which is normal. So there are some careers that have a huge breadth of things that people work on in that career, to the point that nobody can be good at everything. So for example, programmers will not learn every programming language. None of them will. Civil engineers will not learn and build every single type of building. There will be people that specialize in bridges, and people that specialize in houses, and people that specialize in all sorts of different things, and they're not going to know everything. So as a data person, there are going to be some very popular data tools that you are just never going to use. Maybe your company uses Databricks, not Snowflake, or Snowflake, not Databricks, or Redshift, or BigQuery, or any of these tools. You're probably going to use one of them. That means you're not going to use a lot of the others. That's totally normal and fine. And so sometimes what'll happen when you work in a field that is so broad is that you'll read about people doing really advanced stuff in an area that isn't your core area, and it's just going to make you feel like you don't belong. It's going to make you feel like, wow, those are real data people, right? I'm just helping a company make better business decisions. I'm not like making cars drive themselves. That's a totally separate thing that I would never be able to do. I can only do machine learning models for e-commerce, right? But this other stuff is just way out there, right? And really what you're doing is you're comparing yourself with 0 time spent in that domain to someone who has spent years or decades specifically focusing on that. And meanwhile, if you switched and spent a couple of months or years working in that area, you would very quickly realize, oh, this is how I when you were on the outside, you're like, how could they even do that? I wouldn't even know where to start. And then once you're in, you're like, oh, that's how they do it. That makes sense. I understand now because I'm in it. And so you look at it, and it's just made by people just like you. You just don't have experience with it. But because everything falls under this term of data work, you feel like you should have experience with it. And that's just a mistake. You shouldn't have experience in everything in such a broad field like data. So it's sort of like, you remember when you were learning math as a kid and you'd walk by the classrooms of the older kids and you'd see these things on the chalkboards with like these crazy symbols like pi or a Greek letter, and you'd be like, what kind of black magic are these people doing? And then meanwhile, when you get older, one day the teacher explains what that symbol means, and it's just not magic anymore. You're like, oh, okay, I totally get it now. And that's exactly what happens. And, other fields with a more narrow purview don't oftentimes have this dynamic, right? You would never say that you're not like a real accounts payable clerk because you've only paid bills for small businesses and you've never paid bills for governments, right? Or if you were a mechanic, you wouldn't say, oh, I'm not a real mechanic because I only work on trucks instead of cars, or like it doesn't, a lot of other fields don't have this expectation that you would need to know everything in order to be under the umbrella, right? But a lot of data people think that because they've only done certain things or because they've only seen a slice of things, that makes them not a real data person. And that's why this is mindset shift number 3. So when you work in this broad field, you just need to understand that that's the fundamental dynamic of it, and it doesn't make you any less of a data person. And then mindset shift number 4, so the last mindset shift, is that you are looking at a point instead of a curve. So instead of looking at yourself at this very moment and seeing a gap, you need to understand the context of where you are over time. So in the real world, and we talked about this a little bit before, everybody starts being bad and then figures things out along the way. So will you be better at your job than you are 10 years from now? Of course, hopefully. And so all those other people that are great, they started out bad just as like you did, and they started out earlier not being great. And everybody makes stupid mistakes, gets fired, learns something years after they were supposed to. That's normal. Or maybe certain people started out and were just naturally great and they got lucky, and you naturally started out not great. Does that really matter in the long run, assuming that you're going to work on the things you're not great at and get better at them? I don't think so. Over time, everything evens out. And, I personally have made some very big mistakes over the years. And those mistakes help point me in the direction of skills that I needed to get better at. And did that make them any less painful? No, it was very painful. Did I ever get fired? Yes, I've gotten fired before, right? But I've never been an imposter. I've been doing the job, and certain parts of it I did great, and certain parts of it I didn't. And that's the same for every single professional. And here's the thing that you don't appreciate until you've become a senior leader. And having run a team with 100 data people, you get to see a lot of people going through this journey themselves. And even the best people aren't great at everything, right? You might look at the top performer of your team and you might think they're just on a totally different level, right? Oh, you're a junior data person, they're a senior data person, and they just seem like, whoa, I don't even know how to compare to that person. But their manager is seeing the things that they can improve on. And those senior people are not perfect either. And that's the way it works, because your career is a curve. And so I know I knocked it earlier, the sort of just feel better about yourself type of argument about, that doesn't normally work. Sometimes it does actually work for people. And the reason that it works for people is because if you wait, right? If you look at this gap and you say, oh my gosh, all these data people are doing all of these things that I can't do, and then you wait, over time you're going to improve and then close that gap, right? Because you're going to get better, and then in many cases the gap closes by itself until you get promoted and then have to go through the whole thing again. Because the reality of data work is that you're always going to have skill deficits, because once you get good at something, then people pull you up to have new experiences and things that you're not good at yet, because they expect more. And there's even a phrase for this, which is new levels, new devils. So the gap right now that you've got, over time, you're going to close that. and then there's going to be a new gap. Now, maybe you don't close it fast enough, right? Some people ultimately get fired or aren't able to stay at their company because there's a gap and they're not able to close it fast enough. That's the reality of work. Most of the time, assuming that you've got the core skills, you can close them fast enough. But even if that happens to you, you're not an imposter. You continue developing your skills and you keep it moving and you go on to the next company, right? For most of the people that I know that have struggled with imposter syndrome, the odds that they're fired for bad performance are much less likely than all of the other reasons that people get fired for nowadays. So, for example, it's probably more likely that your company does really bad and has to do layoffs or your division closes than people who have imposter syndrome end up getting fired, because most of the people that I know that think they have imposter syndrome, if they're actually not doing that badly. And that's what kind of scares them, right? Because if you know you're doing badly, then you oftentimes don't feel like an imposter. You just feel like you're doing badly. And if you feel like an imposter, it's because you probably don't feel like you're doing badly. Again, it's not 100%, but that's been my experience. And so, again, sometimes the waiting until the gap goes away can work, but bringing people down, recognizing everybody's flawed, and recognizing that you are just one person developing their skills over time, that will cure it forever. Because the next time you move up and you experience this thing again, you can understand, oh, wow, this is naturally what is going to happen. I moved to new challenges, and some of those things that I'm challenged with, I'm finding very easy, and some of them I'm finding very hard. Okay, so those are the 4 mindsets. Now, here is the activity, because I don't think you should just take my word for this. You should go talk to people about it. My points, the 4 mindset shifts, hopefully can intellectually convince you that feeling like an imposter, that if you feel like an imposter, you're probably not an imposter. But being convinced in your brain is sometimes different than being convinced through your own lived experience. So here's the activity. Go talk to those real people that you think are very different than you, and have them tell you how things work for them. And what you'll find is that they're going to tell you about all the problems that they're having and all the challenges that they have, no different than you. And although you won't trust your friends who don't know anything about your industry when they tell you things, you will trust the people that are actually in your industry and that you think are doing so well when they tell you things, because they'll actually know. And so they'll tell you about all the lessons that they learned the hard way, and they're going to ask you for advice on how you've handled the same situations. And as you get to know these people, what you'll realize is that everybody is on the same journey. So that's the activity. And by going through that activity and asking people, you're gonna be convinced through real life conversations even more than the best possible video on the internet. And so I've actually got this foolproof LinkedIn outreach strategy that you can use to reach out to those people if you aren't already connected with them. It's completely free in exchange for your email address, so that I can keep you updated on what I'm doing and send out more advice on topics like this. Check out the link in the comments, and I will send you a template for how to find people to reach out to, and a word-for-word script that you can use for the connection request and for scheduling. So to put it all together, those people that you think are so great are just the same as you. You might just be bad, but you're absolutely not an imposter. If you're in a very broad field, you are only working in a narrow part of it by definition, because any job is only going to be in a narrow part of a very broad field, and it's only normal that you only see that. if you look at your career as a progression over time as opposed to a point in time, then you're going to be able to understand the way that things work and to put things in better perspective. And then lastly, get out of your head and talk to people, because they're going to be able to help you normalize the experiences that you're having. Data work can be lonely, and if your only way of connecting to other data people is reading their highly curated stuff that they put on the internet, then you are doing yourself a disservice, because you are not getting a representative understanding of what things are actually like in the industry. If you like this video, share and subscribe. And till then, remember, never trust yourself that you don't belong. You belong. You're a great data person in the making, like we all are. And thanks a lot for watching. Take care. Bye.